She didn't come in loud. She didn't come in with diamonds or a designer bag or anything that announced itself. She just walked through the door, shook the rain off her coat, and stood there calm, certain, completely unbothered. And that was exactly the problem, because some people look at a woman like that and see an invitation, an opportunity to remind her where she stands. The manager saw his chance. He took it, right there, out loud, in front of everyone. What he didn't see, what none of them saw, was the door at the back of the room. The rain in Seoul that night didn't fall softly. It hit the Gangnam pavement hard and loud, like it had somewhere to be, and it slicked the street outside Lempire into a mirror-black glass reflecting the headlights of armored sedans and the gold glow bleeding through the restaurant's front windows. Inside, the world was quieter, controlled, the kind of quiet that costs money to maintain. If this is your first time here, subscribe and like this video. Stay with me cause you don't want to miss what comes next. Lempire was not a place people stumbled into. You were either born into the circles that dined there, or you had built something significant enough to earn a seat at one of its tables. Tonight, every booth held someone who mattered: a politician with a press secretary 2 tables over, a tech heir with the soft hands of a man who had never built anything himself, a judge who had spent 30 years deciding other people's fates, a celebrity whose publicist sat close enough to intercept any conversation that went sideways. Crystal glasses, white linen that had been pressed twice, a wine list that didn't include prices, because the kind of people who ate here didn't ask. Zuri Williams walked through the front door at 8:47 p.m. She wore a deep navy dress, tailored clean against her frame, and a trench coat she had already started shaking dry before she crossed the threshold.
No logos.
No jewelry that made noise when she moved. Her natural hair was pinned into a neat updo, and she carried herself the way people do when they have spent years in rooms where they had to be twice as precise to get half the credit. Not stiff, not performing, just settled. Present. Like a woman who had already decided what this evening was worth, she approached the host's stand. The general manager's name was Minho, and he had run Lempire's front of house for 11 years. He knew how to read a room. He knew how to read people. He looked up from the podium, and his eyes moved across Zuri the way a man moves across a room he thinks he already owns, slowly, deliberately, deciding. He took in her skin first, then her hair, then the absence of the things he used as shorthand for belonging. His expression shifted in the space between one breath and the next, from the practiced warmth of a hospitality professional to something colder and much more honest. "Can I help you?" His voice carried the specific kind of condescension that has been rehearsed so long it passes for politeness. "We are fully booked for private events tonight. Walk-ins are not permitted." "I have a reservation," Zuri said. Her voice was level, unhurried. "Williams. Private table." Minho didn't look at the screen. He stepped out from behind the podium, and this was intentional. This was choreographed, and he raised his voice just enough for the nearest tables to hear him. "I don't think you understand what kind of establishment this is. We don't serve your kind here." He let the words sit a moment. Let the room absorb them. "Look at this room. Look at your clothes. You don't belong in a place like this, and you certainly cannot afford to sit at these tables. I suggest you find somewhere else before I have security remove you." The nearest booths went quiet. Not uncomfortable quiet, the kind of quiet where people choose. The politician looked away. The tech heir's mouth curved slightly at the corner. 2 women at a 4-top leaned together. The crystal kept ringing softly, someone's glass, somewhere, being carefully set down. 2 security guards stepped forward from the shadows near the wall. Big men, expressionless. Their eyes fixed on Zuri and didn't move. Zuri didn't move either. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look around the room for support because she wasn't looking for it. She had been in versions of this room before, different cities, different languages, same architecture of dismissal, and she had learned long ago that the most powerful thing she could do in a moment like this was to refuse to perform humiliation for an audience that expected it. She looked at Minho directly. The way a grandmaster looks at a board right after the other player makes the move that loses them the game. Patient. Almost sad.
Certain.
"Are you entirely sure," she said quietly, "that you want to make this choice tonight?"
Minho smiled.
The smile of a man who has never once been wrong about a room. He waved his hand toward the guards. "Get her out. Now." The guards took one step forward, and then the doors at the back of the restaurant opened. They weren't the heavy doors of a restaurant storage room or a manager's office. These were different, soundproofed, reinforced. The kind of doors that existed in places where serious men had serious conversations that the rest of the world was never meant to hear. They swung open slowly, and the air that moved through them was different from the air in the rest of the restaurant, colder, quieter, carrying the faint trace of aged whiskey and something darker underneath. Something that had no name, but that every person in that room recognized instantly in their bones. The guards stopped, not because someone told them to. Because their bodies made the decision before their minds could. Because some things in this world don't need to be explained. Some authority doesn't announce itself. It simply arrives, and the room reorganizes around it the way water reorganizes around stone. Ju-won stepped through the doorway. He wasn't a large man in the way that security guards are large, built for width and impact. He was built for something else entirely. Tall, lean, with a kind of stillness that suggested he had long ago stopped needing to fill space with movement. He wore a deep blue suit, the exact shade of Zuri's dress, though no one in that room had the presence of mind to register the detail yet. His cuffs were perfect. His collar was perfect. His face was the kind of face that had learned, somewhere along the way, to give nothing away. Sharp jaw, dark eyes that moved across a room the way a blade moves across a surface, finding every edge. He was flanked by 2 bodyguards who were as expressionless and immovable as architecture, but in that moment they were irrelevant. Everything in that room was irrelevant except the man himself, eye and soul. Ju-won's name existed in 2 registers. In boardrooms and government corridors, it was spoken carefully, the way you handle something that could break in the wrong direction. In the city's underground, in the Port Authority offices where certain signatures moved cargo without inspection, in the real estate offices where entire neighborhoods changed hands without public record, in the shipping yards where billions moved through the dark, his name wasn't spoken at all. It was understood. A pressure. A given. The shape of how things were. He owned Lempire. He had owned it for 6 years. The restaurant's public ownership was listed under a holding company that pointed to another holding company that eventually dissolved into legal architecture so dense that no journalist had ever successfully untangled it. Min-ho had been hired by a man who worked for a man who reported, ultimately, to Ju-won. And tonight, Ju-won had been in the private room at the back with 3 of his senior advisors, finalizing the last pieces of an expansion that would triple his organization's international footprint. A merger. A restructuring. The kind of deal that required, above everything else, a logistics architect precise enough to move billions across the Pacific without friction. He had been waiting for that architect for 40 minutes. His eyes found Zuri before anything else in the room registered. Not the guards. Not the patrons who had gone completely still. Not the crystal glasses or the white linen or the mahogany walls catching the warm light. He found her the way you find something you have been looking for without entirely admitting it, with a recognition that goes slightly deeper than professional. She was standing exactly as she had been standing since the moment Min-ho raised his voice. Straight-backed.
Composed.
Her hands loose at her sides. The deep navy of her dress caught the chandelier light and held it, and her expression was the most remarkable thing in the room, not wounded, not performing strength, but genuinely, organically unbothered in the way that only people who know exactly who they are can manage in a moment designed to make them forget. Ju-won walked forward. He passed Min-ho the way you pass furniture. The restaurant had stopped pretending, and no one was eating. No one was performing disinterest. Every eye in Lempire was tracking Ju-won as he crossed the dining floor, and the silence had reached the particular quality of held breath, the whole room inhaling at once and not yet ready to exhale. The politician's hand had gone still around his wine glass. The celebrity had turned fully in her seat. The journalist at the bar had his phone face down on the counter in the specific way of someone who is trying very hard to appear as though he isn't memorizing every detail. Ju-won stopped in front of Zuri. For a moment, neither of them moved. He looked at her, not the quick assessment that Min-ho had used as a weapon, but something slower and more careful, the way you look at something you have studied extensively on paper and are now seeing in full dimension for the first time. There was recognition in it. And something else, quieter, that had nothing to do with business. He adjusted his cuffs. Both of them, one after the other, a gesture so practiced it had become almost ceremonial. Then he inclined his head, not the full bow of deference, not the shallow nod of acknowledgement, but the precise middle space between them, the bow of one significant person to another who they considered genuinely significant. In Seoul's social vocabulary, among the people in that room who understood it, the gesture was unambiguous. It was public. It was absolute. My sincerest apologies, Ms. Williams. His voice was low and unhurried, carrying clearly in the silence without being raised. The traffic from the port delayed my arrival. I had hoped to welcome you properly at the entrance myself. The words landed in the room like stones dropped into still water. The ripples moved outward in every direction simultaneously. Minho's body processed the information in stages. First, the name Williams, which connected, slowly, catastrophically, to the briefings he had ignored, to the name on the reservation he hadn't checked, to the months of preparation his employer had invested in this dinner. Then the tone Ji-won used when he said it, which was the tone of a man speaking about something he considers genuinely irreplaceable. Then the bow. The bow registered last because it was the most impossible thing, the thing that didn't fit into any version of reality Minho had constructed for himself, and so his mind kept returning to it and failing to process it, like a key that almost fits a lock. Zuri looked at Ji-won. She had known, standing at the host's stand with 2 guards closing the distance between them, that the night would correct itself. She had known it the way she knew most things, not from hope, not from faith, but from information. She had read Ji-won's file more thoroughly than his own advisors had. She knew his organization, his infrastructure, his expansion timeline, his risk calculus. She had spent 6 months restructuring supply chains that ultimately pointed back to his ports, and she had done it well enough that 3 separate firms had asked her, independently, how it had been accomplished so cleanly. She had known the dinner was real. She had known the reservation was valid. What she hadn't known, what she had not calculated for, was the specific quality of his attention when it landed on her in person. The way he looked at her as though the room around her was ambient noise, and she was the only signal worth reading. It moved through her like a current, warm and precise, and she held it the way she held everything, steadily, without performance. "There's no need to apologize," she said, her voice as level as it had been since the moment she walked through the door. "I had the time." The corner of his mouth moved. Almost nothing. Almost a smile. It changed his face entirely. He turned toward Minho for the first time. The warmth left Ji-won's eyes so completely and so quickly that it was almost architectural, like a room losing its light when a door closes. What replaced it was something else, something with the quality of a decision already made, and Minho felt it before Ji-won took a single step toward him. 1 step. That was all. He didn't need more. "You speak," Ji-won said, his voice completely level, utterly without heat, which made it more frightening than shouting could have been, "of who belongs in this room." Minho opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "This restaurant exists," Ji-won continued, "because her supply chains allow my cargo to cross the Pacific without interference. This family's business runs on her precision. Every table in this room, every glass, every contract that feeds the people who sit at those tables, it moves because of what she builds." He paused for exactly 1 beat. "And you stood in my establishment, behind my back, and used your small mind to insult the most important partner I have." The room was so quiet that the rain outside was audible through the walls, a low, steady percussion against the Gangnam pavement, indifferent to everything happening inside. Minho's eyes moved around the room. He was looking for something to grab onto, a familiar face, a sympathetic expression, anything. He found nothing. The politician was very interested in his bread plate. The tech heir had developed a sudden fascination with the middle distance. The women at the foretop were completely still. Even the 2 security guards who had been moving towards Zuri 4 minutes ago had repositioned themselves, almost imperceptibly, as though their bodies had already realigned their allegiances without waiting for instruction. "Chairman." Minho's voice had lost its architecture. "I didn't know. I thought she was—" "You thought wrong." Ji-won's voice cut through the sentence cleanly, no jagged edges, just a precise end. "Your employment ends tonight. Your name will be removed from every hospitality registry in this country by midnight. You will leave this building through the back alley." Another pause, shorter this time, and when he spoke again his voice had dropped slightly lower, the way a blade drops just before use. "In the rain. Exactly where you belong." He didn't look at the guards. He didn't need to. They crossed the room, took Minho by the arms with the same calm efficiency with which they did everything, and began moving him toward the service corridor. Minho didn't struggle. He had enough presence of mind left to understand that struggling would be the one thing that made this worse. His face, as he was walked past the tables, was the face of a man watching something he built over 15 years dissolve in real time. The color drained from it, leaving something raw and structureless behind. The service door swung shut. The room exhaled. Ju-won turned back to Zuri, and the transition was immediate and total. The coldness gone, the sharpness smoothed. His full attention returned to her the way the sun returns after cloud cover, sudden and warm and slightly too much to look at directly. He extended his hand, open-palmed. The table is prepared. The best chefs in the city have been waiting. His voice had recovered its lower register, something almost private in it, meant for her specifically. Shall we? Zuri looked at his extended hand. Her expression shifted just slightly, just enough into the brilliant, uncontained smile of a woman who had been right about something important and had been gracious enough not to say so out loud. She placed her hand in his fingers closed around hers, and neither of them moved for just a moment longer than was strictly necessary. The VIP room was a different world. The noise of the dining room disappeared the moment the heavy doors closed behind them, not muffled, not reduced, but gone, replaced by a quiet so complete it had texture. The room was smaller than the main floor, intentionally intimate, lit with a warmth that the chandeliers outside couldn't quite replicate. A single round table at the center, set with the precision of a ceremony. 2 chairs. 2 glasses. A bottle of wine that had been opened and left to breathe for exactly the right amount of time by someone who had known, to the minute, when they would arrive. Ju-won held her chair, Zuri sat, and as she settled, she let herself, privately, feel the full weight of the last hour the way the host stand had felt when Minho stepped out from behind the podium, the specific quality of the room's silence, when it chose complicity over decency. The cold geometry of 2 guards moving toward her. She felt it, catalogued it, and set it down. She had learned that the things you don't process become the things that hollow you out slowly, but she had also learned that the things you carry too long become anchors. The night had corrected itself. She was here, at this table, in this room, with the contract she had spent 6 months building towards sitting in a folio to her left. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. Ju-won sat across from her and reached for the bottle himself. No theater. No gesture to waitstaff. He poured her glass with the specific kind of attention he gave to things that mattered to him steadily, precisely, not looking away from what he was doing. 6 months, he said, setting the bottle down. We have been in the same city twice. Once in March, once in June. We were in the same Port Authority meeting in Incheon in April, though you didn't know I was there. He picked up his own glass. I wanted to see how you worked before I sat across from you. Zuri's eyes moved to his face. And, you don't explain yourself unnecessarily. You don't negotiate the way people negotiate when they're uncertain. You negotiate the way people negotiate when they already know the answer and are waiting for the room to arrive at it. Something moved in his expression, something private. I respect that in very few people. She studied him across the candlelight, the sharp precision of his features softened fractionally by the warm light, the slight loosening around his jaw that happened when he was being direct rather than tactical. She had read his file. She knew his history, the shape of his empire, the precision with which he had built it from the architecture of the city's underground. She had known, choosing to work with him, exactly what he was. What she hadn't fully anticipated was how entirely he occupied a room, even a room this quiet. The specific gravity of a man who had made enough decisions of enough weight that the quality of his attention felt different from other people's, more deliberate, more complete, like being looked at rather than glanced at. They thought you were an outsider, he said quietly, his eyes steady on her across the table. They didn't know you hold the keys to everything I'm building. Zuri raised her glass. The crystal caught the light and held it.
They never do, she said.
Until they have to. He raised his glass to meet hers. The sound when they touched was small and clear and precise, a single note ringing out in the quiet room, and then fading into the soft hush of a night that had fully, irreversibly turned. He was still looking at her. Not the way he had looked at the room. Not the way he looked at a contract or a problem or a threat. Something more considered than all of those. Something that had been building, she understood now, for 6 months of proximity without contact, of knowing and not yet meeting, and that had arrived in this room fully formed and fully present, with nowhere left to be except exactly here. "There is something I want to ask you," he said. His voice had shifted lower, quieter, with an honesty in it she hadn't heard from him yet. "And it has nothing to do with the contract." She didn't answer immediately. She let the question sit in the air between them the way you let something delicate remain still before you decide what to do with it. Her fingers turned the stem of her glass once, slowly. Outside, distant and muffled through the reinforced walls, the rain continued its indifferent work on the Gangnam pavement, washing the night clean of everything it couldn't hold. "Ask," she said. Ju-won set his glass down. He leaned forward slightly, not invading the space between them, but reducing it, acknowledging it, making the conversation smaller and more private than the room already was. In the warm light, his eyes had lost the edge they carried in public. What was underneath was something she hadn't expected to find in a man built the way he was built, something careful. Something that had learned, through significant cost, to want things slowly.
"When you were standing there," he said.
"Before I came out. When he was speaking to you like that, and the room was watching, what did you feel?" It was not the question she had expected. She had expected something strategic. Something that would fold back into the business between them. This was different. This was a question asked by someone who had been in that position themselves, not as a curiosity, but as someone taking inventory of shared geography. She looked at him for a long moment. "I felt the room make a mistake it couldn't take back," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, so quietly it was almost to himself. "I have stood in rooms like that. Different insults. Same architecture." His jaw shifted slightly. "It doesn't get easier." "No," Zuri agreed. "But it gets more useful." Something crossed his face, quick and complex, something between recognition and something warmer, and he absorbed it the way he absorbed most things. Without performance, without deflection, taking it in fully and letting it change the temperature of the room by some unmeasurable degree. Meanwhile, on the other side of the soundproof doors, the dining room was conducting its own reckoning. The table nearest the host stand was the first to fully register what had happened, and from there the recalibration moved outward like a tide. The politician's press secretary was on her phone. The journalist had quietly unflipped his from the bar and was typing with the focused energy of a man who understood that what he had witnessed was not a private moment, but a historical one, the public alignment of two of the most significant logistics and infrastructure forces in East Asia, formalized in the most visible room in the city, witnessed by everyone who mattered. By morning it would be reported. By afternoon it would be analyzed. By the end of the week, the three international firms waiting on the merger would receive calls from their legal teams. Outside, in the back alley, Min-ho stood in the rain. He had stopped trying to call anyone. His phone screen showed 11 missed calls returned with silence, and 2 messages from industry contacts that both said variations of the same thing: "I can't speak with you right now," which was its own kind of verdict. The rain didn't distinguish between people. It came down on him with the same indifference. It came down on the pavement, on the armored sedans, on the golden light bleeding from Lempire's windows, and it soaked through his suit jacket one thread at a time. 15 years. 11 of them in that building, in that role, in that particular performance of authority. He had been so certain he knew what the room was for. He had been so certain he knew who belonged in it. Inside, Ju-won slid the leather folio across the table. Unhurried. Deliberate. The way he did everything. "It was always going to be you," he said simply. "I needed tonight to make it official." Zuri opened the folio. Her name in the header. Lead Logistics Architect. She read it the way she read everything, thoroughly, without rushing, taking in every detail. Then she looked up. "There's a clause on page 4, she said, "that I want to renegotiate." His eyes sharpened with something that was unmistakably pleasure. "Of course there is." The contract was signed at 11:14 p.m., not with ceremony, not with witnesses summoned or hands shaken for cameras, but quietly, at the round table in the center of the private room, with the candlelight going low and the rain still running in thin silver lines down the window glass behind them. Ju-won signed first, then slid the folio across. Zuri picked up the pen, read the amended clause one final time. She always read things one final time, and signed in the unhurried, architectural cursive of a woman who had been putting her name on significant things for long enough that the act had lost its theater and kept only its weight. She set the pen down. Neither of them moved immediately. The room held the specific quiet of something completed, and in that quiet the evening gathered itself around them, the rain, the candlelight, the half-empty wine glasses, the folio closed between them, and everything that had happened in the hours since she had walked through the front door and been told she didn't belong. It felt, sitting here now, like a very long time ago. It felt, in the way that significant things sometimes feel in their immediate aftermath, like it had always been inevitable. Ju-won leaned back in his chair, his eyes on her face. He had the look of a man who had reached the end of a long calculation and found the answer he had quietly been hoping for. "The amended clause," he said. "Is fair," she said. "It is," he agreed. "Which is why I put it there for you to find." She looked at him. He looked back, and neither of them felt the need to look away. He had done that. She understood, constructed the opening deliberately, given her something to push back on, because he had read her file thoroughly enough to know that she needed to know the floor was solid before she trusted her weight to it. It was, in its way, the most careful thing anyone had done for her in a long time. The candle between them was burning low. Ju-won reached across the table, not for the folio, not for his glass. He reached for her hand where it rested on the white linen and covered it with his, and she turned her palm upward almost without thinking, which told her something about herself she filed away to examine later. His thumb traced once across her knuckles. The gesture was so small and so deliberate that it arrived not as an action but as a declaration, specific, unhurried, asking nothing and offering everything. "There's going to be a dinner in Tokyo in 3 weeks, he said. His voice was low and private, meant only for this room, this table, this distance between them. A formal one, the kind that matters. His eyes didn't leave hers. "I would like you to attend. Not as my logistics architect." He paused. "As my guest." The candlelight shifted. Somewhere in the draft from the room's ventilation, the flame leaned slightly sideways and the light moved across the planes of his face, and Zuri watched him in it. This man the city whispered about. This man who had crossed a dining room full of Seoul's most powerful people to bow his head to her in public, who had poured her wine with his own hands, who had constructed a clause on page 4 of an international contract because he had read her well enough to know what she needed. She thought about the room outside these doors, the one that had watched her be diminished and done nothing, and then watched everything reverse itself and recalibrated silently and efficiently in the direction of power. She thought about Minho in the alley and the rain. She thought about the fact that she was not afraid of this man. Not of what he was, not of what he controlled, not of the particular gravity he carried with him into every room. She had made her peace with what he was before she ever agreed to work with him. And she found, sitting here with a contract signed and his hand warm over hers, that she was less afraid than she had been in a long time of something else entirely, the particular risk of wanting something and letting it be known. 3 weeks, she said. 3 weeks. She let the silence hold for one more moment. Let it be exactly what it was. Then she turned her hand fully in his, and her fingers closed around his, and she looked at him with the same directness she brought to everything: negotiations, boardrooms, rooms full of people who had decided before she spoke what she was worth. "Send me the details," she said. Outside, the rain was still falling on the Gangnam neon, on the slick black pavement, on the golden glow of L'Empire's windows. The dining room beyond the soundproofed doors had mostly emptied. It was nearly midnight, and people who had witnessed something significant often needed air, needed distance, needed to call their people and decide together what it meant. The center table where Ju-won had escorted Zuri earlier in the evening, the one the cameras had caught, the one the journalist had already filed his preliminary report about, sat empty now, its white linen undisturbed, 2 glasses still holding the faint ring of wine at their bases. Inside the private room, the candle burned down to its last half-inch. Ju-won lifted his glass. She lifted hers. The crystal touched once, that same clean single note from earlier in the evening, smaller now, more private, ringing out in the intimate dark. "Some doors, once opened, do not close again."